Hi there, and welcome to this webinar on how to compose a world-class leading and development RFP. So my name is Loic Lemarois, and I'm a marketing manager here at Headspring. This webinar is the first episode of a series of webinars for L&D and HR managers who are looking at ways to improve procedures and processes within their business. So yeah, just make sure to actually register to our newsletter so you can actually see all the upcoming webinars coming up. It would be good for you to attend them. So I want this webinar to be interactive, so please use the comments on the side here, or as well, you can send an email to marketing@headspringexecutive.com, and we'll make sure to answer them during the webinar or after the webinar. So today we're here with Jean-Marie Ardisson, Vice President of Corporate Partnership at Headspring. Hi, Jean-Marie, how are you?
Hi, I'm fine, thank you very much.
And as well, we're here with Adam Kingl, author of The Next Generation Leadership. He's an educator and consultant, and as well, he's part of the Headspring faculty. Hey, Adam, how are you?
Hi, good morning, lovely people.
Guys, so the floor is yours.
All right, well, thank you very much. Well, welcome everybody. Just maybe a word about Headspring so that you realize who we are and why we can talk about RFPs with you, or we're more than happy to discuss RFPs with you. You might know that we are a joint venture between the Financial Times and IE Business School in Madrid. And we've been created 5 years ago, so we're not a startup anymore, 5 years ago, to concentrate on custom programs. So we do custom programs, exclusively custom programs, in our own way. We're slightly different from traditional players on that market. But of course, the market being what it is, we receive a lot of RFPs from you, and we'd like to kind of share with you some reflections about RFPs, what works, what doesn't work, and how we're more than happy to work with you on that particular exercise, if I may say so. So first point, what is a kind of our definition of an RFP? I mean, what does it mean? What is it? We believe an RFP does several things. Of course, it's a process for you to choose a partner for a given project, but we see many more things in RFPs. The first thing is it's really an invitation to create cooperation and dialogue with us, of course, because by definition, the RFP allows you to be in touch with outside providers, but it is as well a very good opportunity to create a cooperation and a dialogue with the business partners in your company. One of the things is when we create anything which looks like a learning journey, by definition, it is for somebody else. So you and us work for somebody else, and it's kind of interesting to invite that somebody else to tell us what they are actually looking for, and maybe not just take their words for granted, but challenge them and see how that connects to challenges they have, to the strategy of the company, to transformation projects or whatever. So that one of the first point is that invitation to create cooperation dialogue. The other thing, of course, it's a great opportunity to collect ideas about learning and development of people. What we mean by that is there are plenty of things going on out there, and you've observed as well as we have with all digitization going on, gamification, VR, VA, a lot of things are happening, and of course you are scouting the market, you're scanning the market. We do the same thing. So it's an interesting opportunity for us to discuss what is available and what is the most appropriate for the population you want to have as a target population, the kind of topic we're talking about, the culture of your own company, because the same topic in two different companies is going to be obviously handled in different ways, just on the culture dimension, for instance. And the third thing we see is pretty important as well, is the impact you want to have in a given financial and time budget. We all know that by definition an RFP is a topic, a deadline, and a financial budget. The question is, how do we have the best impact in that set of constraints? And it's a long, I mean, it's a discussion to have, having in mind that, of course, we all agree that the impact is not the happy sheet at the end of the session. It's what has actually changed. What do participants do differently 3 months later, 6 months later, 9 months later, after we have finished, if I may say so, the learning journey? So it's as well for us an invitation for a conversation on impact measurement in a set of constraints, which we all know we have, and all that for Adam, for myself, for all the people in the design teams which work with us, all the people on your side, on your design team, and your business partners as well. It's a kind of a frame for these conversations, and all these conversations should go on because it's a good time to think about what we want to achieve. How do we discuss with the business partners internally with you? How do we make sure that we've scanned what is available on the market, so we just don't limit ourselves to what we've been doing for the last 3 or 4 years? And how do we get the best impact out of all that after a co-design that we've done together? So that's basically our definition of an RFP. Of course, it might be slightly wider than a lot of things we see together, all of us. It might be a little bit of a dream, I'm not sure, but it's a way we like to create these conversations with you around the topic of creating an RFP. The RFPs we see are not always like that. And I guess I'm going to pass on to Adam on what is not an RFP in our way, and what we'd like to see as rooms for improvement, if I may say so. So
Yeah.
Adam.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So yeah, let's talk about what an RFP maybe isn't or shouldn't be. And you'll excuse me if there isn't just a soupçon of cathartic unburdening here in talking about sharing some of the bad experiences that I've had participating in an RFP, which of course, teaches us what not to do. And look, when I'm talking about what not to do, I don't simply mean to make life easier for the potential supplier partner. It's what will create a win-win, both for the client and for the potential partner that you choose. So what is an RFP not? It shouldn't feel like an exam. Part of that is just about being transparent about what it is that you're looking for. So not having any hidden agendas, and also the style. So I think always you want to begin as you mean to go on. It sounds commonsensical, but too often I find the RFP becomes so heavily formalized and constrained, it becomes extremely transactional, and then the potential relationship already is burdened before it even formally begins. So as open, transparent as you can be, because of course the RFP process is also the opportunity for both parties to get a sense for what it's like to work with each other. And honestly, both parties have a choice. I mean, clearly one party is commissioning this dialogue to determine whether this is the right partner. But truth be told, that potential partner is also looking at whether this client is going to work in a way in which will bring the best of themselves to the work. So certainly also it isn't a tick box exercise. Yes, it's really important to define what criteria are going to be important for you in selecting a supplier. But also, I guess the advice I would say is leave room. What I mean by that is leave room for the unknown, to a challenging idea that you hadn't considered before, a design that you hadn't thought of, a contributor, a supplier, a location, a simulation that isn't in your tick box exercise. But don't dismiss great ideas out of hand because you didn't anticipate it. Because also, I think at its best, an RFP process is an invitation to innovation. In other words, it's the organization saying, here's where we've got to, and we've thought very hard about it, and we talked to a lot of people in the organization, and now build on that for us. Give us more, add plus those ideas. Don't just respond, because then you're going to get, if you only get what you expect, you're probably bound to be disappointed. Third, a process that blocks dialogue. So I mentioned before that the process should be as transparent as possible. So what I mean by that too is sometimes, and sometimes the reasoning that we hear is it's all in the interest of fairness. But as a result, what that might mean is, well, we can't answer that question because no one else asked that question. We want everyone to have the answer to the question, or this is the time to ask questions, and after that, no questions. I'm not sure how helpful that is, if I'm perfectly honest, because you want every potential partner to show up at their best. To show up at their best, they probably are going to require information, and information that you didn't anticipate. And they might ask for information at a time that you didn't anticipate. I would just ask to try to be as open and available as possible, because that potential partner is working really hard behind the scenes to respond. So if they have questions, I think it only can help to be available to some extent. Another structural way to make sure that happens is that you make sure that there are parties available throughout your value chain for that RFP. Let me just explain briefly what I mean by that. I think there are at least 4 key parties in a value chain on the organization side or the client side. There's the sponsor, right? Whoever is sort of approved this, might be the CEO, might be the CHRO, right? To go ahead. I said, yes, we can spend X amount of money to do Y, etc. There's generally an HR or Learning and Development department involved. There's procurement, and then there are the potential participants themselves. I think in a best case scenario, all 4 of those parties are involved to some extent in the RFP process. At its worst, once the RFP is sent out, if it is only resting with procurement and none of those other critical parties are involved, you get potentially incomplete information that goes to the participants. Because I work with brilliant procurement people, but no one, no matter how genius they are, could possibly anticipate everything that's in the mind of a sponsor, of learning and development director, of a participant. So if those people can all be available in the process, again, that's ideal. So that's also what I mean by don't make it opaque, right? Have it be an open process. Also, what an RFP should not be is asking for every detail of the solution. So what I mean by that is generally what you're asking for is to get a sense of what is it like to work with this person or this party. What kind of solution are they going to put forward? So to get a sense of their skills, of their capabilities, of their innovation and creativity, of their ability to match their brief, of their facility with things like virtual. But to ask the partner to, for example, to design to the last minute of every piece of the intervention as part of the RFP is, and I might be provocative here, but again, I said this is a cathartic moment for me too, is unfair. Really, I think the detailed design, the detailed minute-by-minute design occurs after you award the work to a potential partner. Because you don't underestimate the amount of work it takes to simply even provide an indicative design. Generally, the social contract is once you win the work, then you do the very detailed design. A decision that is, I mentioned this, an RFP should not be a decision that's segregated amongst the parties in the organization. So try to have everyone involved at every moment, rather than it's just procurement at this point, then at this point we'll bring in this party, and then at this point, because if the discussion goes in a way you didn't anticipate, or you're starting to think about this program might be something slightly different and you aren't involving those people, then you might get to the end, bring in someone like the CEO, and they say, wait, that's not what I agreed. And then the whole thing sort of explodes on you, and you don't want that. And that brings me to my last point. Don't even issue the RFP until you have sign off from the organization. This sounds obvious, but you would be shocked at the number of times that I've been involved in RFPs where we discovered down the line, potentially even not only after the proposal, but after the pitch, that actually there wasn't approval from a key stakeholder in the organization, or a budget wasn't approved, or the time out of the office wasn't approved for the participants. All of that really needs to be done before you issue an RFP. Again, I think that's a question of fairness. If it happens repeatedly, then even the supplier organization, the partner are making views about whether they can work with a given organization. And it's in your best interest to, when you issue an RFP, to have as many responses as possible, because you want people who are enthusiastic to want to work with you. And that means you've got to show up well. And that means being honest and transparent to saying, yes, in issuing this RFP, we already have all the approval, the budget, the sponsor, the time out of the office, etc. So just make sure that you do have that before you embark. By the way, on the other hand, it's perfectly legitimate to bring in trusted partners to talk through what your RFP might be or could be but just be transparent about that and say, look, it's not all confirmed yet, but we just want to explore what this, might look like, what the scope and scale could be, who it would be for, what it would look like. Talk to a couple people. Why not? I think it increases the neurodiversity, the perspectives on what ultimately will be your RFP. But just be clear about what stage you're at in that dialogue. Next slide, please. Okay, so why is a good RFP important for both parties? I think sometimes, and the reason I say this is that, or even talk about this topic, is sometimes we don't consider all the benefits that you could glean from going through the RFP process, and as a result, there isn't as much learning as one could possibly get for it. There aren't as many possible benefits as you can get for it. So I'll be brief, but I think it is important just to quickly talk through a little bit of this. For the organization, well, certainly it's an invitation to dialogue, and that goes back to my earlier point that it shouldn't be transactional. It forces you to be clear about what you want this engagement to be, while at the same time, as I said, leaving some freedom, some flexibility, some openness to be surprised for new ideas. It creates an opportunity to improve the articulation of what's required. This goes back to my earlier point. And certainly requires clarity about what you're looking for in a partner. So in other words, be clear about what you're going to bring to the table. That might be program support, it might be a learning platform, and what do you require from the partner? And just be really clear about that in the scope, because obviously that will hugely affect things like the price that a partner is going to propose to you. It offers insight about what it might be like to work with potential partners. So as I mentioned at the beginning, it's an opportunity for both parties to get a sense of what is this like to work with one another. Therefore, I think it's perfectly legitimate for you, the client, to ask the partner to, at some point, ideally the pitch, show up with the people that we are going to be working with on a daily basis, right? At least show me the core team, so that I know that I can work with these people and that we have a rapport, that we have a chemistry. I think that's a very important reason. If it looks good on paper, and even if the pitch was incredibly impressive, but then you get a team that you maybe hadn't met before, and you all don't get along and you don't quite know how you can work with one another, then that's a recipe for disaster, or could be a recipe for disaster. And also the RFP process can help to gain engagement and excitement for the initiative. Now, let me be clear, not buy-in, right? You should already get your sponsors buy-in to say, yes, we're doing this and this is the budget, as I mentioned before. But it is an opportunity to get people really excited about this. And that can only help you, right, to gain momentum, to get people to really say, yes, I'm behind this. Because programs at its best also involve particularly senior stakeholders from the organization, whether those are panels or discussions or presentations or whatever it is that bring in the organization. So it feels very cohered and is very clear in delivery that it's a partnership between the, say, business school or consultancy, whoever, and the client organization. And for us, the supplier or partner, well, it's an opportunity, obviously, to showcase what's possible, what we can do, what our capabilities are, what our expertise is. Now, I completely understand that on paper, many executive education suppliers look the same. Trust me, I've worked with enough of them to know that they are not. They really do have different capabilities, skills, advantages, disadvantages. And the only way that you kind of can dig under the skin and really understand what those differentiators are, what those core competencies are, I think is in dialogue. And that's why the RFP is a good thing. It gives us an opportunity to showcase what we're good at. It gives you an opportunity to understand, to validate that. Second bullet point, for us to gain intimate knowledge about the organization, which can only help in the future. Now, I don't mean anything salacious by the word intimate, but I certainly mean information that we wouldn't necessarily get from your website or from a brochure, to really get under the skin about what is the need here, what is the challenge, what is the opportunity, and in particular, what is your context? In other words, what are you going through right now, whether that's good things or bad things, so that we can really understand how we can help. Because I believe programs at its best are deeply contextualized, right? They are of the moment. You see how they're going to help you right now, rather than kind of generic leadership, generic strategy, etc. Last point, for us, it creates optionality, and for you, it creates optionality in terms of the nature of the partnership. So what do I mean by that? Well, perhaps you discover that a given partner isn't right for you for this engagement, but there might be certain things that impressed you where you think actually they would be perfect for this thing we're thinking about down the line. So that's really useful for you. It's also useful for the partner, because the partner is probably also thinking the same thing. If, for example, okay, after all this dialogue, we probably can tell that we're not in the forefront, to win this piece of work. However, we really think that we would be perfect for ABC, whatever that, and that's very useful, right? That's why, I think it's useful to bring in a number of parties for an RFP, even if you're not sure, who's going to be perfectly right for that engagement. But also, when I say optionality, increasingly I'm seeing clients parsing out the engagement to a number of suppliers. So what I mean by that is they might ultimately, at the end of the RFP process, say, we're giving the virtual element of the program to this party, we're giving module 1 to this party, we're giving module 2 to that party. Now, here's the health warning. That, of course, can work. Most of the time, in my experience, it has difficulties. I'm not saying it's impossible, but when you do that, what you're sort of doing is you're putting the burden on yourself to hold the whole together, right? To have all those parties play well with each other. Who's going to hold the red thread or the program narrative for the participants, right? These are all really, really important considerations. Don't assume that just kind of will happen automatically. So, and of course, it's also possible to say that there is a supplier of suppliers. In other words, we're going to give this part to this supplier, this part to this supplier, this part to this supplier, and this supplier is also going to hold the whole, and kind of bring everything together. That's also a consideration. But don't underestimate the amount of time it will take to integrate parties that aren't used to working with one another. So it might just on paper look like a good idea for budgetary reasons, for, to get the best of each person's expertise, whatever it might be. But do think about that it probably will take more time to get everyone working together to provide the solution that you desire. Okay, I'll be quiet now and pass things back to Jean-Marie, and let's go to the next slide. Perfect, thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Adam. Before we continue, I don't know, Loic, if there are any question that you get, if what we've set up to now is prompting any comments or agreements or disagreements, anything to discuss at this stage?
I think we'll have a Q&A session at the end. That will be easier.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, perfect. So if we try to take all the things we've said in perspective about the fact that the RFP is actually a kind of an invitation for conversations, both with potential providers and with people within the company, the business partners, the participants, the line managers of the participants, maybe even in some cases the top management, depending on what the topic is all about. There is a kind of I would say a kind of a checklist, and I'm sure we've forgotten about several things in that checklist, but a kind of a checklist of what we believe makes sense in an RFP, so that it both allows us, I mean you and us, to have a pretty fair idea of what we want to achieve, and at the same time it opens a little bit of possibilities for what Adam was calling optionality. The idea that, of course, when you work on the RFP, you know what you want to achieve, but there might be a couple of things or a couple of questions that we actually raise, and these questions prompt another question and another one and another one, which ultimately opens a door which was not initially planned, if I may say so. So what are the kind of things that we feel, and here again it's our viewpoint, and I'm sure you have additional things to plug in there. First of all, what is context of that relationship which we're initiating? And what we mean by that is there are cases where the context is reasonably impactful. We're talking about launching new products. We're talking about going multi-channel. We're talking about making sure that we meet the MiFID II requirements of the European Union or things like that. And that's, I would say, a reasonably low impact context. And there are contexts where you are really changing things. I mean, your industry is strongly disrupted. So of course you want to talk about strategy, but actually it might not be strategy. It might be strategy and digital. It might be, how do we transform the organization? How do we change the way the organization is set up, and so on. And we believe, I mean, Adam and I and everybody believes, I guess, that it's quite kind of important to share that. The information on your company, in most cases, we can find on the web. So that's information which is useful, but which is available. The context in which you do things is slightly more difficult. It's important for us because it gives basically an idea about the ambition of the project you have. So the outcome, of course, that's a consequence of the context. The outcome for both the organization and the individual participant. Here again, I mean, let's remember that any thing we create together has got an impact, or has to have an impact on both the participants and the organization. The organization in most cases is represented by the line managers or by the business partners, and we've got to make sure that we address both things. I mean, if there is something in there for the organization, but the participants feel that there is not much for them, they might not attend, they might be quite passive. So we are not going to get the level of energy that we want to have to make sure that the participants are not only, I would say, trained or developed, but that they are ambassadors in the rest of the organization. If we do something for a purpose, what we are looking for is that participants are ambassadors, and they talk to their teams and they talk to their peers, so that the whole thing kind of lives after whatever we've done together. Of course, when we decide on the outcomes, we need to measure them. I think we all agree. I've already mentioned, and Adam as well, that the happy sheet is not enough, and how we measure impact should be part of the conversations we have. In most cases, actually, you have some tools already in companies. I mean, you're using 360 systems, or there are already things going on that might be used, or they might not be appropriate because it's too heavy, for instance, at this stage, and we want to create something else. The sponsors, I'm not going to be very long there because Adam has talked about that, but it's important that we get the involvement. And, and I think the involvement is not only agreeing on running a program and agreeing on a financial and a time budget. It is as well being willing to walk the talk and to be part of the program to a certain extent. And we understand that it's not always easy for sponsors who are business people to be on stage, if I may say so, in a program. But here again, that's something we can work out together. You are specialists of delivering. We are specialists of delivering. If we believe that there is a sponsor within the organization which is really worth being part of the team, the delivery team, we've got to make sure that that person is willing and comfortable about doing it. So we need to train the people as well. Of course, the profile of the participants. In most cases, we have that. One of the key things is how are they going to impact and how are they going to be impacted by the change that is happening in your company? Because having the profile is one thing, understanding how they will act or how their environment might act on them is important as well. And it explains, for instance, or it is hints, for instance, about how much coaching do we need to include or not, and that's very related to the impact that they have within the organization. What do you expect to contribute internally? Of course, I mean there is. I mean we all know that there is a lot of knowledge in your organizations, and it is important that the internal people from within are part of the program for both reasons. One is because there is some knowledge that is yours, and the other reason is the more people are being involved, the more contribution is coming from within, the more credibility there is on the whole thing. Number of and type of suppliers is important for the reason Adam was mentioning. There are some cases where it makes sense that we partner with somebody else that you have in mind, because there might be some specific capabilities. It's not that easy. There are traps in there, so we need to be careful, but it's important that we know that. How rigid and loose the specifications are, I think we've already talked about that. Learning preferences, I mean, that's something which is important for us as well. Use blended learning, but blended could go from 100% face-to-face to 100% online. And the question is, what is the learning culture of your company? Do people have the habit to put 2 days aside? Do people work in teams? Do people prefer to basically have small nuggets on their telephones? I mean, what are the learning habits? We don't know that in most cases, but it's kind of important because the content is one thing, but the way we deliver, and I would say more importantly, the pace, how we engage people is quite related to the learning preferences and the learning cultures. The next step after the RFP submission, in most cases we have that anyway, the time frame of the decision, the design and the delivery. Here, in cases, there are cases where we are a little bit frustrated because of the time for design, and that relates to something that Adam was mentioning earlier, where we will never, I mean, it probably doesn't make any sense that we tell you what's going to happen by the minute in the program. So there is always some time that we need to have together to co-design, to co-create. It might be more or less important. It might be that we actually co-create everything. So then it's a significant amount of time, and we need to have the time to make that happen. There might be cases where we are co-designing or co-creating only part of it, or a subtle part of the whole thing, and we might need less time. But in any case, we've got to make sure that there is enough time on this development and design step, which is really important. I guess all of us around the table, we know that if the design is not exactly what we want, the chances to hit the objective are really jeopardized.
Can I just jump in there, Jean-Marie,
Yes, of
if you'd
course,
allow?
Adam.
Just on the thank you. Just on the interest to speak about time. Certainly, yes, don't underestimate the amount of time it takes, but also build in time for iteration. Right. In other words, don't assume that you get together for a couple days, you whack out a design, and then it will be perfectly formed. And that's exactly what you're going to do. You know what generally happens is you create that co-design together, then you've got to socialize it to the sponsors, maybe share it with a couple of the participants, see what they think, and and only then do you get a sense of whether this is right, or whether you have to tweak, or whether you have to fundamentally go back to the drawing board and start again. So build in iteration. Almost any literature on creativity in general tells you that iteration is an important step in the process. But also, I would say unlimited amount of time doesn't necessarily yield an infinitely better solution. So the great composer Leonard Bernstein, once said, to achieve something great, only two things are needed: a plan and not quite enough time. So constraints are also useful, be it budget, be it time, because that gives you the boundaries of the sandbox in which to play. But you just don't be overly aggressive in recognizing that A, it probably should be a co-solution, and that will take time. B, allow time for iteration.
Yeah, thanks for that comment, Adam. Last 2 points, and then let's keep the last 10 minutes for questions. The budget, of course, because if we have no idea about the budget's constraints, which doesn't need to be the budget to the last cent or whatever amount of whatever currency you use, but an idea of the budget gives us as well an idea of what could be done. Here again, part of our activity is to scan the market for things which are available. There are things which are available which are very expensive, some other ones which are less expensive, maybe with slightly less impact, but then it's a matter of trade-off anyway. I mean, we have time constraints and we have budget constraints. It's not a surprise for none of us. And the point that Adam has already mentioned, the opportunity for us to ask questions in an open manner, possibly to even ask questions to people who are outside of the L&D and the procurement department of the company. There might be some business questions that we would like to ask. There might be cases where we read something on your website and in the news which don't match, and it's important that we understand, as Adam said, openly what are the things, so that we get under one skin to a certain extent, and we can really do something which is appropriate for what you have as a challenge now. And the program now is going to be different from the program 2 years ago or in 2 years from now.
And
well,
just on this question of budget, if I could just jump in there too, it's okay also to give a range. We think an engagement, we can spend between X and Y. But what a supplier should then legitimately be able to infer from that range is that you have approval to commission an engagement within that range. But to give no budget is a recipe for disaster, because I've been involved in too many where the client says, well, we don't have a budget, we have approval, but we want to see what what we get back, and then that will tell us. And then everyone's submits something, and then the client says, oh, well, we've discovered that based on all the solutions, we really don't have enough budget to deliver what we wanted. Well, that means that you didn't actually get through sufficient approval steps to know, A, you have will, but also you have some budget set aside. So do get a figure from your organization, or a range of figures, before you start the RFP, and share that with your suppliers. It makes no sense if you have a £300,000 budget, but you don't tell anyone that. You will potentially get solutions that cost $3 million. That wastes your time, and it wastes the potential partner's time. So I think actually a good amount of transparency is actually a win-win for everyone.
Well, Loic, I'm sure you have questions, so maybe we stop talking and see if there is any interesting questions or topic for discussions that we can share with the participants.
Yeah, so we're going to open the floor to questions. And actually, I have one here, so I don't know who wants to take it, but it's, how can you identify or find RFPs?
How can we identify RFPs?
I think it's more for the supplier. how can you identify and find RFPs?
Well, they are. I mean, if I get the question right, and Adam, please jump in. There are different ways to identify RFPs. There are some platforms where RFPs are available. These platforms are more developed for public RFPs or NGOs type of RFPs, where there is a kind of a process which has to be very open by definition. For the I would say the kind of a private RFPs, we don't have any way to identify in most cases. We get them from potential companies who want to create something, from potential customers. But there are very few ways, at least in the business environment, to identify and to screen or scan massively RFPs.
Yeah, I think that there are mainly two main ways. One is there's a prior relationship, right? So a company knows of X supplier, and so when they issue an RFP, they send it to that person. That also means that for the client, it's useful to continue to meet potential partners before you have an RFP, so you have a really good sense of who to submit the RFP to, because then you'll have a sense of the range, the capabilities, etc. And the second is there are some, particularly in the public sector, as Jean-Marie said, be it government, etc. NHS, where organizations apply to be a preferred supplier, and then everyone in that preferred supplier pool gets all RFPs and then have the option to submit. Now, in those cases, often there are a whole slew of RFPs, and any given supplier is probably only submitting for one or two at any given point, even though there might be like 20 possible engagements in that pool.
So I think the other question is more on what you talked about, the measure of impact. So is how to communicate the measurement of ROI and what tools to measure the success of a program.
Sure.
Do you want to start,
So,
Adam? Or
sure, well, I mean, Kirkpatrick is a good start, right? About how do you measure learning impact, right? I think he's still the late great Professor Kirkpatrick is still a genius in this point, and he just said break it down right into 4 categories, which is first the happy sheets, right? What did people think about the learning? Because that gives you at least a leading indicator whether you have any momentum there. Second, how is that learning continuing? What's the dialogue? What are the videos, the articles, the books being consumed? Third, what's the change in behavior? And that's a lagging indicator. So you really don't want to start measuring that until 6 months on, 9 months on, et cetera. And then there's the impact on the organization. Now, I hesitate to use specifically the term ROI because ROI, specifically return on investment, is only legitimate if you're saying one of the outcomes is additional revenue earned, savings made, additional market share accrued, et cetera. But if that isn't, then there's a return on the learning, and that could look different. That might be the change program that we had planned actually was implemented successfully, which is different from a financial ROI, which is why I'm using the term ROL. But there isn't one.
ROI as return on impact.
Yeah, so return on impact, yes, absolutely. So. But I guess the main takeaway I would give from everything I just said is that there isn't one indicator or KPI, and it's probably best to agree what those KPIs are over a time frame.
Yeah, and I fully agree, and particularly on the step number 3, for instance. I mean, whereas at level 3 from that matrix, for sure that it has to be a lagged measurement, depending on the topic, depending on the ambition of the program. Maybe you want to measure 3 months later, 6 months later, or even 9 months later in some cases. One of the ways to probably improve that a little bit is, at least that's something we experience in some cases, is if we have a chance to build some kind of a community between the participants, or even better between the participants and their line managers, then we can see some things happening. So at least we get an easy feedback of what's going on in terms of implementing what was part of the program. the ROI in terms of return on investment is very tricky, because that would basically mean that whatever we do as part of this journey together is the only thing which has an impact on the profitability of the company. And we've got a tough time to believe that. I mean, you've got line management as well. You've got a bunch of other things, including the market conditions having an impact on that. So it's difficult to isolate the benefit of the learning only.
So I'm going to be a bit conscious of time, but maybe we can answer one last question. So from a supplier perspective, are any of the points you've raised major red flags to not bid for the RFP in the first place?
Yeah, well, two things for me. No, we don't have a budget agreed yet. Or two, no, we don't have approval from whatever sponsor that is, CEO, CHRO, CLO, right? We're going to do that, as we go through the RFP process. Either of those would be a major red flag for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
So I think we're a bit running behind on time. So we'll answer all the questions, because there's more questions coming in. We'll answer all the questions via email back to you directly. In the meantime, if you do have other questions, please send them to marketing@headspringexecutive.com, and we'll send them once we actually receive them. So if you did enjoy this webinar, please make sure to sign up to our newsletter, because we'll be updating you on the upcoming webinars in the next few months. So I really hope you enjoyed this webinar, and I wish you a really good day.
Have a good day, everyone.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was a pleasure. Bye-bye.
Bye.